course, we're going to focus on the value of program increment planning and quantifying the value of the ways that we change our ways of working is something that I have an extreme passion for, so much that my family at home has named me the calculator, because I'm talking about value calculators all the time. So let's dive in. Why is this valuable? What I have learned is that when we translate our ways of working using the language of money, either hours as currency or money as currency, it really motivates a change in an organization. When we create quantified scenarios that you will see, it's orders of magnitude more powerful than just speaking in concepts and just hoping people can extrapolate that to the value that they would get from doing these things. And I'll show you some examples. Dean Leffingwell, the father of SAFE, if you would, has said many times, there may be nothing magic in SAFE except the program increment planning. So taking that in, along with reading Don Reinertson's book around the principles of product development flow, where he really uses these hypotheses, these theorems, and proves them in economic ways, that has really inspired me to then dive into, where's the magic? What is the magic really in program increment planning, and can we quantify that magic to help people understand it better? So I work a lot with quantifying value. I'm working now with a large military defense contractor who is implementing digital transformation. And we talk a lot about what do we need to do, how much is it going to cost? And it's really easy to lose the focus on what are the outcomes. And so we need to be able to quantify the value. And that's hard. It's really hard for a variety of reasons. One reason is because there are these different states of value. So value can be conceptual. Here's my example. PI planning helps us identify dependencies across teams. Oh, great. That sounds like a good thing to do conceptually. Or we can quantify it, which takes it a step further, where we would say for our program, given the number of teams, the nature of the teams, the dependencies across them, if we could identify a scenario around this using our parameters, we could conjecture that identification of dependencies in our PI planning could save us, say, 173 person hours in a program increment. So that's the part that I'm going to focus on with you today. Now, once we start to realize value, if we can take it that step further, if we decide to invest that step further, we could actually measure, if we had a baseline of how much it cost us to identify dependencies before we did program increment planning, and then after, if we went to that extent, that would be measured. And then if we measured it time after time, it would be proven. Now, my hypothesis to you today is that we can motivate change. We can motivate people to take that step toward a new way of working with quantified scenarios, and that it can be much less effort to get to that step than to the measured and proven steps. So let me show you. So I said, what is that magic? What is that magic in PI planning? So I went back into all the SAFE trainings and the videos, and I looked up videos online. I love when people in different languages, in Spanish and Dutch, are espousing the value of their PI planning, because it distills down to the same elements. And so I captured some of those elements, and they're listed here. And I said, what of these can we quantify? Where's the most compelling value? So what I've highlighted for you in orange are the elements where I've actually created value calculators to reinforce it. Now you might say, have you quantified all these other ones? Actually, some of them I have designs for calculators, and I could show you those. But I'm going to prove to you that if we can quantify the most impactful elements, it is sufficient to motivate people to then agree to invest in a program increment planning. And as Darren and Silvio and others on this call can attest to, once you get into that PI planning, once you experience that magic, you don't even have to quantify further. It's a yes and answer from the participants. Okay, so let's harken back. Remember in the olden days when we would get people together in person for program increment planning? Well, one of my customers said, oh, no, we cannot have face-to-face program increment planning with these 100 people because it is so costly. And so we put some numbers around that. We said, if we have 17 people coming, it was to Washington State in the Western United States. If we have 17 people coming from Minnesota, the average travel cost. If we have 22 people coming from Bangalore, wow, that's a big number, right? And mostly they said, but I'm taking those people away from what they would otherwise be doing for 2 full days. That's a huge cost. And so we said to them, well, what about the catering room? They said, listen, that's in the noise. So we estimated that this dollar cost of PI planning was about $221,000. Yes, that's a big cost commitment. And most of it's in the people cost of being away from their other jobs. Now, when you do remote PI planning today, don't you get the same kind of pushback? I know enterprises where they say, well, we only bring in these 20 people, not everyone on the art. So this is where we need to be able to talk to them about the value side, right? The return on this investment. So from that for that specific customer, I used some of my value calculators and said to them, listen, and I showed them the numbers underneath this. Remember, the estimated cost was $221,000. And I said, okay, well, if we have improved productivity because of alignment on a common mission, if we only get 5% improved productivity in this program increment, or if we get 10%, or if we should get 20%, which the SAFE case studies tell us is the low end of the range in the case studies, if we put the numbers around that, we would see a huge savings. Now, there are other things that we honed in on for that particular customer. If you get people aligned during the time that they're committed to PI planning, aligned on dependencies, aligned on the vision and the mission, this was another cost that I included. Now, the dependency management piece is the part that I find incredibly valuable. And I'll show you a calculator for managing dependencies in program increment planning and the elements of that. Then if we catch a dependency early and test it early using our agile processes, there's savings from that. There's also access to a subject matter expert, savings from that. And so these were just enough parameters for this particular customer that it was let's call it a no-brainer. If you know that expression, a slam dunk, that yes, we're going to do the face-to-face program increment planning. And of course, after this first program increment planning, then we also collected the value, the conceptual value that everyone on the team could articulate. So let's dive into some of these value calculations. So this is in Excel, and this is where I started with my value calculators, and I have basic parameters. So this is where we need to make it real for people. People who have a 50-person art, and depending on the nature of their work, they might say, yeah, but those other arts that are bigger and more complex solutions, it's different for me, right? Everybody says it's different for me. So I give them a calculator where they can put in the parameters for what makes sense for them. In my experience, not just with these calculators, but for years, I've built value calculators for engineering lifecycle management tools. For instance, going from a word-based requirements management to a tool. And what I have learned is that numbers do imply precision, but people need something that they're comfortable with. Yes, it's at least that much. Okay, so here's what you see. I've got my basic parameters. The yellow fields are the ones people can change. And then here's where I plugged in the 5, 10%, 20%, right? Where the safe case studies say it's 20 to 50%. So is this reasonable enough? If we only got 5%, does that justify it? Okay, and then here's some others. So without going into too much detail, being cognizant of the time. So I have evolved to creating online tools and these calculators so that people can use them. Now, in all my years, which are many, of doing software development, we've always talked about, finding a defect in integration testing. At the end of a waterfall cycle, it's going to cost X times as much than if we find it in requirements. And unfortunately, that caused us to just really go heavy on the requirements and design side of the process. So this is a calculator. Full disclosure, I build these in a tool called YouCalc. I recently presented a keynote on a no-code, low-code developer day and talked about this is really a no-code solution. And so I provide these. I'm going to show you this calculator, just walk through so you can see how these calculators work. And that did not switch for me. So let me go. Okay, so here on project and team, if you go to learning value calculators, you'll see the set of value calculators that I have. So finding and testing dependencies early. This is the one I like to start with because it is it's intuitive to people and simpler than the other ones that I'm going to talk about. So this is my website connecting to YouCalc, which seems to happen instantaneously when I'm not presenting on Zoom. So there we go. Okay, so this is where you can enter your parameters. So what's the average time to find and report a defect? I give some defaults, but I'm just going to use these defaults. And you can see the star means these are required fields. One of my favorite things from my experience is when there's a defect and all that finger pointing, the tester is pointing at the developer is pointing at the tester, somebody is pointing to the guy who built the solution. So I call that blame storming. And the closer you get to a scheduled release date, the higher that number goes, as you probably have experienced. So then how long does it take to remediate that defect with all the associated documentation and et cetera? So we just put in those hours. So this gives me a total hours for each defect caused by late discovery or integration of a dependency. So what are the dependencies that we would normally find, right? That's a function of the complexity of your system. Let's just pick an odd number, like a number like 18. And then we want to speak in the language of dollars. So, you know, if we have really highly paid engineers, let's just pick a US dollars amount. This is our total savings. Don't you want to save $86,000? If you didn't save that, how many more people would we need to add to the team? I mean, that represents probably at least a half of a person's salary. So this is where we get the attention of leaders, and we need leaders to help lead these transformations. So this is just my example of showing you one of the calculators and how it works. Okay, so let's go back to the presentation. And you can, those are out there, they're free to use. We don't collect any information from you. This is just free to use in the spirit of advertising our visible expertise in such things. Okay, now the one that I actually, that calculator I just showed you is if we don't find these dependencies early, if we discover them late and it causes defects, what's the impact? Now, this calculator is managing dependencies in PI planning. When before SAFe was a thing, I was a solution scenario designer at IBM in the engineering lifecycle management tools. And we had designed a solution for teams of teams, and it was all about dependency management. This is near and dear to my heart. This is where I think the real gold is, one of the real golden nuggets in PI planning. So in this calculator, you can pick the number of teams, the average number of stories per team, the percentage of the team stories with a dependency. Oh, the percentage of the team dependencies with a cascade. So if Darren's team needs something from my team and we go negotiate that, there could be a cascading dependency for something I committed to Silvio's team. And so that's what the cascading dependencies are about. So the total dependencies and the average burden cost for the involved participants. Now, this is the same whether I am managing them in PI planning or outside of PI planning. So we put a parameter for the average minutes to negotiate one dependency. I usually pick something like 10 minutes. And so we have a cost of managing dependencies in PI planning. Now we think about, well, if I don't manage them in PI planning, where's the effort? Well, the big effort is really in this thing that I call the cost of when. Scheduling all these meetings, people showing up for meetings, the context switching, going from one meeting to another. And so this is a real gold mine in organizations that we accept the fact that we schedule a lot of meetings, we attend a lot of meetings, we are just bombarded with meetings. And I was on a call just earlier this morning with a guy who said, oh my God, I've already had too many meetings this morning, right? You could tell he was already beaten down. And I didn't put anything in the calculator about the demotivational aspect of all these meetings. But I have average meetings to schedule a dependency, the minutes to schedule a dependency negotiation meeting, minutes to attend, context switching minutes. And so this is just justifying the cost, right? The cost of managing them outside of PI planning compared to managing them inside PI planning is huge. Okay, so the delta cost is $7,000. Now, a key thing to remember here is, just like with all things agile, many times it's the conversation about these parameters that really is the impactful thing. So with these calculators, I can trade off different scenarios. I can understand which of these elements are causing the biggest impact. If it's the minutes to schedule meetings or the context switching, are there things that I should do in my organization to address that aspect? And so that's what I have found is really thinking through what are the parameters and then allowing people to work through which of these parameters are most impactful. Okay, now this is the last calculator I'm going to show you. It is the one that people tell me most often they share out with everyone else they know, and that's the cost of context switching. And so this, I encourage you to go out and look. I've given you the link to just all the calculators here. But if we have heads down time, can we actually get 8 hours a day of heads down time? I don't know anyone who can. So I give you the option of picking an 8-hour chunk of like what I would call flow time, or 4-hour, or 2-hour, or 1 hour. And so in this example, I picked 2 hours, and research says, and this is from the American Psychological Association, not from scrum.org or Scaled Agile Framework. What is the context switching ramp up time? How many minutes does it take you to get back into that deep thinking flow of work and creation? Research says it's an average of 25 minutes. If you don't believe that and you want to try a parameter like 10 minutes, but most of the heavy duty engineering organizations I work with, they say, oh, it's at least that. Okay, so you can pick the planned productive days in a week, productive weeks in a year, and how many people working on the project. And I think the value I chose here was maybe 100 people. Now, I'm showing you this in person hours because actually I've done some work with Darren and his folks in the UK, and they've given me feedback on my calculators, and they've said, well, what about using different types of currency? So I offer this calculator in US dollars or person hours, but obviously converting that to your local currency would be an easy next step. So those are my calculators, and being sensitive to the time box that that I've been given, and the fact that we will have a breakout session where we can dive into this further if you choose. I just want to summarize. So PI planning, yes, provides many sources of value, and we can talk about those conceptually. We teach it in all our SAFE classes. We experience it with our simulations. When we quantify the most impactful sources of value, like dependency management inside the event versus outside, like dependency, catching a dependency early to avoid late integration defects. That's a huge one for the people I work with that are building hardware inclusive systems. And so talking about that, I also have a calculator for helping people who build hardware inclusive systems to look at the economics of creating a proxy for their hardware, a proxy being a model or a 3D printed prototype, or a simulation. So we need to take the economic view, not only to understand our choices from that perspective, but what are the parameters of those choices, as I said earlier. So the last takeaway here is examining those practices of PI planning to determine which ones provide the best economic value will help you steer the event for the best outcomes. And let me give you an example. I worked with a group at Chevron IT, and their biggest dependencies were not across the teams within their release train, but with teams on other release trains. And so when we looked at the economics of managing those external dependencies outside of the PI planning event, it convinced them easily that they needed to include a time inside the PI planning event to bring in some of those representatives from other release trains or from procurement or finance or other parts of the organization. So that's an example of what I mean here, examining the practices that provide the best economic value so that you know where to invest in the event. Okay, now before I give you, I'm going to give you a little bonus, a couple of bonus slides. Before I get to that, just feel free to reach out to me. I'll be hosting a breakout session here in a few minutes, but I love to talk to people about this. People connect with me like on safe community forums. I worked with a guy in the Netherlands where we worked through a calculator I built around team topologies. And I just love to do that. I learn from your specific scenarios and experience. So I encourage you to reach out for collaboration. Okay. Your bonus slides. Silvio and I have been working on quantifying the value of the use of one automated tool over another, like the PI planning app versus something else you might use, Mural or something in PI planning. And I'm not going to go over this in detail with you, but the great thing about this conversation is how, we can talk conceptually about some of these things, but where's the big value? Where are the things that we can focus on? And through our analysis, Silvio and I absolutely hands down discovered, which wouldn't surprise you, but we quantified it, is that this in sync, the real-time in sync between PI planning app and your Jira or your Azure DevOps, not only significantly reduces effort and time, it helps people focus on the real work and reduces risk of misalignment. And then Silvio and I actually crafted a first draft of a calculator around that. And this is something that's an ongoing effort between Silvio and I. But just another example of how you might use this idea of quantified scenarios to help, take an economic view and do the analysis for your question. Now, I have a really good friend who's an SPCT at Boeing, and I talk about my calculators to her, and she says, "Oh, I don't do math. I hire people to do math for me." That's what she said. Now, as a woman who has a degree in math, I find that like, what? But this just means that I am happy to help supply that mathematical perspective for you, as would, I'm sure, Darren or the other people on the call who've really experienced these kind of changes in ways of working. So that's it, Silvio. How'd I do on my time box?